This is part 9 of the Craftsman King Seeley 100 drill press conversion rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 8, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be completing the assembly of the drill press. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Okay, so we have the base mounted on the floor and the column lock screw is already started in the back side of the base, and I'm just lubing up the lock shoe and then inserting it into the base, and then we can insert the column. One end of the column has a milled surface on the inside of it, and that's for some attachments like the MSA, so make sure that's the side facing up. And then we just want to insert the column so that it goes through all 3 of those bores. So it's all the way to the floor right now. So we're going to lift that column up about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch so that it's not resting on the floor, and then we're going to tighten it down. And this is because we don't want the column resting on the floor. It'll rust if it does. And this allows the entire foot area of the base to hold the drill press steady. Next, we installed a temporary column collar so that the table support has something to rest on. And then we'll lube up and install the lock screw and the sleeve and then the lock nut for the table support. And again, we're just using super lube for all of this. I like having the lock handle on the right side of the drill press. Because I'm right-handed. Then tighten it down. And then we can remove that temporary column collar. We're going to reuse that for the head. And next we're going to lube up the column protrusion on the table support. And then insert and install the table. You might have to rotate it to get it to go on there. You're trying to line up 2 bores inside the table. But once you get it lined up, it will go. There you go. And we're just going to rotate the table so that we can install the protractor. This has 1 screw that just goes in the center of it. And then we'll level off the table upside down and then make sure that the protractor is lined up. And then tighten it down. Then we'll rotate the table right side up. And And we can install the locking pin. And that's fine. You don't need to beat that pin in there or anything like that. And then we're going to lube up the lock screw and sleeve and nut for the table rotation. And insert that into the bore. The same for the nut. And then tighten that screw down. Next, we're just going to install that column collar again, and then install the head casting. It's got 2 bores, and you want that column to sit just at the top of those 2 bores. And then we'll line it up. And then we're going to lube up the lock screw handle and sleeve and nut for the head casting and lock it in place. And on all of these locks, the sleeve and the nut have flats on them, and those flats need to face whatever you're locking those up against. So in this case, the flats need to face the column. Tighten it down. Then we can remove that temporary column collar. And now we're going to install the spindle pulley assembly. So we just line it up with the bores. And if you have to, you can use a mallet to seat it, but this one I'm able to seat just fine by hand. So we can reach up under it and make sure that the bottom bearing is resting on the outer snap ring. And then we can use a flat edge and a ruler. And we should be right at 3/4 of an inch or more. And if so, then we are good to hook. Now we can install the 2 machine screws that lock all of that together. They hold the spindle pulley assembly in the head casting. And again, I have a video that explains all this, and I'll put a link for it here. But there's 2 machine screws, one that goes on each side. And you do not need to tighten those down with any force. Just snug them up. And if for whatever reason you need to remove the spindle pulley assembly, remember you've got to pull these 2 screws out first. Otherwise, you're going to play a real fun game of trying to get them out of the head casting. Next, we're just going to insert the fiber washer on the lock screw for the pinion and start that. So that screw had a dog point on it. And we can insert the pinion hub spring assembly. And then we can go ahead and mount the feed knobs on the feed rods and install all 3 of those on the hub itself. And then we can insert the spindle quill assembly. We need to install the quill gasket and then lube up the quill. And then just insert it into the bore. Make sure the rack is facing towards the column. And then you're going to pull out on the pinion and then rotate the spindle pulley assembly so that the splines on the spindle engage with the spindle pulley assembly. And then you can push the pinion back in, and the gearing on the pinion should engage with the rack on the quill. And then I like to make sure that one of those feed handle rods is 90 degrees when the quill is in its up position. And then you can gap it properly away from the head casting, and there is a recess in the pinion that dog point screw, the lock screw, rides in. So once you've got it riding in that gap, then you can tighten it down. Then we're going to push up on the feed stop bracket to make sure it is fully seated on the quill. And we can install the feed stop rod and the nut for it. And then we can tighten down the feed stop bracket screw. Again, make sure it's fully seated. And if you watch that video that I linked earlier on how everything internally works, you'll understand why. And then tighten down the nut holding the feed stop rod. If you have to, you can use a pair of pliers or something to keep the feed stop rod square, or a piece of paper on each side of it to make sure it rides in that cutout on the head casting without rubbing. Then we're just going to check to make sure it's not rubbing and that everything moves freely. And then we're going to insert and just start the lock screw for the tension knob. And then make sure those two fingers on the tension knob line up with the dog leg on the feed return spring. And then we can start tensioning the feed return spring. And once we get it where we want it, we can lock it in place. Check that feed return. Maybe tighten it up a little bit more so that it's snappy. And then tighten it down. Check it again. There we go. We've got a video on all of that, on how to tension the feed return spring, and I'll put a link for it here. Next, we've got the quill lock, and we're just going to lube up the screw for that, and then the sleeve and the nut. And again, these flats need to go against whatever they're going to be locking, and in this case it's the quill, so they need to face towards the quill. And then the nut for the other side. And we can tighten that down a little bit. Then we can install the handle. So it has a small set screw So what we want to do is lock the quill down and make sure that that handle is positioned at the very bottom of the tension knob like it is here. And then we can insert that set screw and lock it in place. So that's locked. And then when we unlock the quill, it should rotate towards us and rest on top of the tension knob. Like so. That's unlocked. And that's locked. Too easy. Next, we'll get the 2 motor mount screws started on each side of the head. And then we can install the motor. And then we can install the motor pulley. So if at this point we need to raise or lower the motor, we can do that. And then the pulley should sit on the motor without resting on those screws that hold those caps on. So it needs to have about an 1/8 of an inch gap between the pulley, the bottom sheave of the pulley, and the motor. And once we get the set screw started and tightened down, then we can put a level across the top 2 pulleys and see if we're level. We can raise and lower that pulley as needed, and then we can install the belt. So this is a 1/2 inch by 45 inch cogged V belt. I like the cogged belts better than a non-cogged belt. And then once we've got all of that lined up, we can pull back on the motor, and that's what tensions that belt. So sometimes I'll use a cheater bar just to, you really don't have to get it as tight as I like to get it, but with a new belt, this kind of helps that belt stretch out and get rid of its hard areas. And then we just tighten down those 2 lock screws. And then we can install the chuck key and then the 2 quill stop collars. And I'll just get that first one started, and then I'll run the quill all the way out. And then I'll move that lock so that it's bottoming out on the head casting. And then we can put the second one on. There's supposed to be a felt spacer between them, but I didn't have one for this drill press, so no big deal. They still work like they're supposed to. Next, we'll just test the drill press. Make sure everything's running as it's supposed to. Runs. No crazy vibrations or noises or anything like that. And that is the assembled 100 drill press converted from a benchtop to a floor standing. So we will just go ahead and apply some paste wax to the table because we never got around to doing that. Then we can buff that off. And so this is what we started with, this bench top. And we reused pretty much everything that came with this drill press. So that hub, and that feed stop bracket, and that knob, and that quill lock handle, all that chrome that was badly gone on that stuff. We polished all that up, cleaned up everything, repainted everything, same motor, everything. and used that column and that floor base to make it into a floor standing drill press. And here are the final pics of it. I think it turned out great. I like that color. And I like that contrast of the black with the champagne mist. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed working on this drill press and making the videos. If you have questions or comments, just leave them in the comments section. Right now, I'm not exactly sure what's going to be my next project. I've got a couple other things to work on, but I don't know if I want to do them or do something else in between. So if you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support that everybody gives me. And as always, I will see you next time.